tonight about universities, but it has implications far beyond that. And as it's no mystery that a lot of American institutions are failing, are having a lot of problems. Those problems are often interlinked. So I'll be talking about what's happening on university campuses, but we'll move off campus as well. So I think it's really helpful, this ancient Greek concept of telos. Aristotle used this word a lot. It's really helpful to keep this in mind when we look at any institution. Think about what is its purpose, and then you can figure out, well, what are the norms that we should have so that this institution can achieve its purpose. This is especially important for speech. We're having a lot of conflicts about speech, words in a lot of institutions and politics everywhere. But if we keep in mind, what's the purpose? So the telos of a knife is to cut. And so if someone says, I've got this really great knife, it doesn't cut anything, but it's a really great knife, you would say, well, wait, no, you've misunderstood what a knife is. And if somebody said, well, I have a friend who's a really amazing physician. She can't heal anybody, but she's a great doctor. You'd say, well, no, wait, no, you've misunderstood. And so what about a university? What makes a great university? What is the telos of a university? We have this image in the Western tradition. We trace the academy back to Plato's academy, back to ancient Athens. And so so we have this wonderful rendering by Raphael, I think it is, of the academy at Athens. And we have Plato and Aristotle in the center. And there's a lot of activity here. But what are they doing? Are they fighting? Are they playing? What are they doing? They're discussing, debating, disputing. It's a certain kind of activity which, when people engage in it, something happens. We achieve our telos. And what is the telos? It's right there on the crest of many of our top universities. Veritas, truth. A university's telos is to find truth and then pass it on along with habits of thinking that will allow students to find truth themselves after they leave the university. This, at least, is our conception of ourselves. It's so deep in our culture that even when Hollywood made up a mythical university called Faber University, for those of you who are my age, Animal House, the motto of Faber University was, knowledge is good. And it's even the motto here. So the motto of this university, let your light shine, in Greek. So we have a sense of what a good university is. It's one that discovers truth, increases it, passes it on, things like that. We also have a sense that this pursuit is not just noble, it is brave. There's something fearless about people who will pursue knowledge whatever the cost. Our heroes include Galileo, well, Socrates, of course, the original one, people who died for the pursuit of truth. Thomas Jefferson, who founded UVA, where I worked for 17 years. For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error, so long as reason is left free to combat it. So this is what we think of ourselves. But suddenly, from out of nowhere, around 2014, a wave of fearfulness came into university culture. And my friend Greg Lukianoff was one of the first to really diagnose it, I think. Greg runs the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. It's an organization that defends students' speech rights. Administrators are always putting on restrictions, largely to protect themselves from legal liability. They're telling students what they can say and where they can say it. So FIRE has pushed back on that since the 1990s, and it's almost always against the administrators. Well, Greg took over around 2002. He's running FIRE. He's been prone to depression his whole life. In 2007, he has the worst depressive episode of his life. He makes very specific plans to kill himself. And at the last moment, he calls 911. He breaks down, calls 911. They talk him into committing himself to a hospital, which he does. And when he's released from the hospital, he learns CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, a very powerful, very general approach to psychotherapy in which you learn to recognize your distorted thoughts. You learn to recognize things like catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, black and white thinking. The things that depressed people do, anxious people do, which they depart from reality, but they talk themselves into being depressed and anxious. And the discovery of Aaron Beck and others in the 1960s was if you can correct the thoughts, it actually releases people from the emotions. and it's very effective at treating depression and anxiety. So Greg learns this, he goes back to his job at FIRE, and then suddenly in 2013 to 2014, for the first time, now it's the students who are asking for restrictions on speech, books, speakers, words, ideas. He'd never seen this before. Most importantly, students who were asking for this were using the exact cognitive distortions that he had learned to stop doing. So if this speaker comes, it will be a disaster. Students will die. From a speaker that they don't have to go to? So students were thinking in these ways that Greg recognized as distorted. So he comes to me, we'd met through a mutual friend, he comes to me because he liked my first book, which talked about CBT, and he says, John, weird stuff is happening on campus, and if the students are thinking this way, isn't that going to make them depressed? And isn't this, could it be that colleges are actually making students depressed? And I had just begun to see this exact thought pattern at NYU, and I thought, my God, this is the best diagnosis I've seen. So I said, wow, what a great idea. I think you should write this up, and if you want help, I'd be glad to co-author it with you. And he said yes, he'd love to have my help, and so our partnership was born. We submitted our draft to the Atlantic in 2015, in January of 2015. Now the kind of stuff that was happening, both before Greg came to me and after we submitted, was this. Suddenly, we were seeing all these reports of students requesting trigger warnings. So if a book is going to be assigned that might be upsetting, the professor should warn the class. A book of mythology might have sexual violence in it. The class should be warned before they're asked to read Greek mythology, things like that. There was suddenly a big upsurge in professors who were disinvited from campus, who were protested or shouted down. And for the first time, we started hearing students asking for safe spaces, which didn't mean a protection from physical violence. It meant a protection from ideas that they thought were hurtful or hateful. So at Brown University, there was a debate between two feminists, one of whom argued that America is a rape culture. One argued it is not. And you might think that's a perfectly good topic for debate. But some students thought that if someone comes to Brown and says America is not a rape culture, this could invalidate the experiences of some students who had been victims of rape. And therefore, this talk must be stopped. And when the president didn't stop it, they created safe spaces for the students who would be traumatized by the existence of this talk on campus, even though nobody had to go to the talk. So it was very puzzling, and all this stuff was covered in the New York Times and New Republic and places like that originally. So this was the sort of stuff that led Greg and me to write our article, and we offered an analysis of how students are beginning to think this way, where just a few years before they didn't think this way. We didn't see signs of it. So the article comes out in August of 2015, and there's a lot of debate about it. It's widely read and discussed, and a lot of people said we were catastrophizing, that we're overgeneralizing from a dozen examples on campus. But a couple months later, all hell broke loose, beginning at Halloween at Yale. Nobody wore offensive costumes, as far as I know, but there was a debate about whether the school should offer guidance or not. That debate blew up into protests, demands brought to the university president for massive changes at Yale. They give him an ultimatum, 1 week to respond. He meets the ultimatum in just 6 days. Gives as much as he can, $50 million for additional diversity hiring. So it's a huge success for the students who are demanding massive changes to Yale. And because of that success, right afterwards, lots of universities now have this kind of protest and demands for major reorganizations of the universities and changes, especially to speech codes, what can be taught, what's mandatory, things like that. So, and while they begin, there's often a racial justice element early. The protests quickly come to encompass almost anything. So at Oberlin College, the banh mi, the Vietnamese food served in the cafeteria, caused protests because it wasn't authentic enough. Now, of course, Vietnamese cuisine is French and Vietnamese, so it's already a mixture, but it produced protests. At Northern Colorado, here in this state, a professor assigned our article and let the students pick what topic they wanted to discuss. He wanted to see, can students really handle discussion? And so the students picked the issue of transgender rights. And in the course of the discussion, someone reported the professor. How dare he expose us to this hateful language? Anyway, the point is, even assigning the coddling the American mind became something that could produce objections and charges. The professor was ultimately fired. Now, tensions then heat up even more after the election of Donald Trump, which political polarization is heating up all over the country. It's this semester where we get the actual violence. I want to be very clear. There's been very little actual violence on campus. What there was mostly in the few months after the inauguration. So the riots at Berkeley, where a lot of people got hurt, but nobody was actually killed. Charles Murray speaking at Middlebury, his faculty colleague, interlocutor rather, they were attacked and she was injured. She has permanent neck damage. She's quit. Evergreen State College in Washington State, a gigantic meltdown. They took the president essentially hostage, didn't let him go to the bathroom. He was as compliant as he could possibly be, and they still humiliated him. So anyway, so most of that stuff happens in spring of 2017. Things in some way have gotten worse since then, but the violence is largely gone. There's almost no violence. So the pattern, what we see here, is a new, we're calling it a new moral culture. It's a comprehensive view of the world, including a set of innovations that are requested or demanded by the students. And at its heart, it's that students, beginning around 2014, we started seeing students who believe that they are fragile, that students are fragile, and that the university is a dangerous, hostile place where students need protection. They need deans and professors to provide protection, not from physical violence, but from words and ideas and books and speakers. So that's what our book is about. Things got so much worse and more complicated after we published the article, so we dug a lot deeper, and the story that we come up with, I think, is really fascinating because it's not just about what happens on campus. It actually goes out in all directions. So I'll try to tell you a little bit of the story today. In brief, well, actually, here's sort of the story, which, okay, I guess I won't tell you the story. I'll focus on something else. But there's this strange thing that happened in many universities, we believe is actually a result of rising political polarization in the country, rising anxiety and depression of Gen Z, which I will tell you about, paranoid parenting. We began overprotecting our kids in the 1990s. We stopped letting them have free play. There's also things happening specifically on campus and changes to attitudes about justice and social justice. So there's like all these threads come together right around 2014, 2015. But my talk today, I'm going to do something a little different. Rather than telling the historical story, like how did this come to pass, I'm going to focus on three really, really terrible ideas. This is what we found as we dug deeper to write the book, that ideas are powerful, and there are ideas about psychology that are right, and there are ideas that are really wrong. And if you raise kids or you structure an institution around terrible psychological ideas, you'll get terrible results. And that, I think, is what has happened, and many universities have done this with the best of intentions. So here's how it goes. So here's a really, really bad idea. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Now, many of you recognize that this is the opposite of what Friedrich Nietzsche said. So my first book was about 10 ancient ideas and whether they're right or not. And it turns out they are all right with some interesting modifications. So I've got a whole chapter in there on the uses of adversity. In every culture that leaves us writing, leaves us a body of ideas, there's the recognition that adversity leads to growth and strength. So Friedrich Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And the reason why that's true is explained best in this wonderful book by Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote The Black Swan. He writes this book called Anti-Fragile, because he's trying to understand systems that need to be challenged, that need adversity, that need chaos in order to grow. He's thinking originally of the banking system. The American banking system was so fragile before the financial crisis. He's one of the few who predicted that it was all going to go down because it has no resilience built in. What he wants isn't just resilience. So the way to think about this is, a wine glass is fragile, and so if you give it to little children, they'll play with it and they'll drop it and it will break, and that's bad for everybody. So we don't give them glass, we give them plastic. Plastic is resilient, and so if they drop it, it doesn't break, but it doesn't get better, right? It doesn't improve the more you throw it. So what's the word for things that get better the more you throw them, the more you stress them? And there isn't one. So Taleb coins the term anti-fragile, and examples include bones. Your bones get as strong as they need to get given the shocks on them. So if we do space flight for years, they get weak. Even in weeks or months, they get weak. So you need stress on your bones. The immune system is the best example. Peanut allergies are now 3 times as prevalent or more than they were in the 1990s. Why is that? Well, some allergists, some immunologists noticed that this is only happening in countries that tell pregnant women to avoid peanuts. And so they did a very direct test. They simply recruited about 600 women who had recently given birth. And there's an Israeli snack food called bamba, which is like a puffed corn chip, like a Cheetos type thing, but with peanut powder on it. So it tastes like peanut butter a bit. So a 2 or 3 month old infant can enjoy eating bamba. So they recruit 640 mothers whose infants have either eczema or egg allergies, which means they're at higher risk of a peanut allergy. Because peanut allergies are pretty rare, but in this population they're more likely. So they recruit them and they say, okay, randomly assignment, half of you, here's some Bamba, give it to your kid on a regular interval, and don't worry, we're not just going to send you out to give your kid peanuts. They monitor them, but half of them, they expose their kids to peanut dust from a very early age. And then at age 5, they come in for a full immunological assay to determine their response to peanut proteins and peanuts. And the other half are told standard advice. Your kid's at risk. Don't you eat any peanuts. If you're lactating, the proteins can go through the milk. So avoid peanuts, standard advice. What happens? Among the avoiders, 17% develop a peanut allergy. So for the rest of their lives, they will have to fear going to restaurants. You've been with people with peanut allergies. It's hard because sometimes the restaurant doesn't even know what they're doing. So they have problems for the rest of their lives. But what about the kids who are exposed to Bamba? 3%. Only 3% have a peanut allergy. So we could largely wipe out peanut allergies by doing the opposite of what we've been doing. And that's why the subtitle of our book is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. If you have an anti-fragile system and you protect it from shocks, you're hurting it. Okay, let's try that again. Babies are fragile. If you bring a baby home from the hospital, you can't believe they're entrusting you with this fragile little thing. You want to protect it, and when they start crawling, you want to put a helmet on them. You don't want them to bang their heads. But here's the thing, if you protect them, they don't learn how to protect themselves. And so once you start down that road, you have to always be there for them. And then you have to continue being for them in college and after college. I teach in a business school, and I'm now beginning to hear stories of people from business people, they gave a young employee a bad performance report, and they heard from the employee's mother. So it never stops. When you go down this road, it never stops. And I can show, I do this demonstration all over the world. Let's see if it works here in Colorado. To see how we've changed our child rearing practice, I want to ask you a question. At what age were you allowed out? At what age could you leave the home, leave your house, walk to a friend's house, 500 meters away, or you and your friend, you go down to a store? Basically, at what age did your parents trust you to not be under their protection, but you could actually go outside? Not your backyard, beyond your backyard. At what age? So think about what age. If it was first grade, you should say 6, roughly. So think about the age, and now I'm going to ask you to answer by generation. So I'm going to say only people who were born in 1982 or before, so you're Gen X or baby boomers. So only 1982 or before birth year. I'm just going to point my finger around the room. When I point to your area, just call out the number. What's your number?
First grade.
No, call it ages. Say age. 6. Just call it.
6.
Okay, so there's a very strong mode here, right? 6. The norm was first grade. At first grade, you could go out with your friends. Now, you couldn't take the train to the city or anything, but you could actually go play outside, and you didn't have to have adults watching you. And there was a couple of 8s, there was 1 10, but overwhelmingly it was 6. That was the norm. First grade, kids can go outside and play. Now let's do it only if you were born in 1996 or later. So raise your hand high if you're born 1996 or later. Okay, so you're Gen Z. You are all Gen Z. Most of you are probably current undergrads. Okay, so just those who raised their hand, what's your number? So call it out when I point to you.
13.
6.
8.
10. 14. 10.
12.
Okay, so you see the difference. I'm sorry, millennials, you're just not interesting because you're just right in the middle. You're like totally, don't worry, but so this is what I find. So the norm all over America was this until the 90s. Whereas what I find for Gen Z is generally this. Now in rural areas, it's younger. And so we did hear a couple of 6s, some 8s. So I'm guessing that people from rural Colorado or other rural areas tends to be younger. But even suburbs, which are very safe, even suburbs that have very little crime, the parents have begun vastly overprotecting them. So, and I was just in Spain. It was the same thing. I've done this in Australia, New Zealand. New Zealand is the last English-speaking country that lets kids go outside and play. And as you'll see, they're a little later in the problems coming to them. So, almost all childhood stories don't involve the parents. The kids are going off on their own, but we said no more of that. In the 1990s, we said no more of that. The places you'll go and you might get hurt, so no more of that. And when we stop kids from playing unsupervised, that means we're supervising them. We're enforcing the rules, and they don't get to learn how to do this for themselves. And when we deprive kids of play, this has massive effects on their development. So Peter Gray, a wonderful psychologist at Boston College, has an article on this. I mean, look at all the good things that come from play. All mammals play. Our brains require it to wire up. And that play needs to involve conflict and failure and getting hurt. In all those ways, play promotes mental health. Now, one of the most important aspects of play is risk-taking. And as you've seen, when kids learn how to do something, they then make it more dangerous. They scale up the risk. They've got to titrate it because they need risk. And so they will make something more risky so that they can enjoy it. And so Alison Gopnik, a developmental psychologist, wrote this really wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal. And she says, trying to eliminate all such risks might be dangerous. There may be an analog of the hygiene hypothesis, which is like the peanut hypothesis I just told you. And then she says, in the same way, by shielding children from every possible risk, we may lead them to react with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't risky at all, like a debate between two feminists at Brown University. It's not risky at all, but some members of Gen Z saw it as dangerous. And in this way, we are isolating them from the adult skills that they will one day have to master. So I'm not saying that we need this, because there used to be consumer products that really killed kids. And Nietzsche did not say that what kills you makes you stronger, because it really doesn't, okay? So this is not good. Kids could really die. This is good because kids can get hurt. And that's crucial, because if you can get hurt, then every day you learn how to not get hurt. Whereas my kids, probably like a lot of the Gen Z students here, my kids grew up with this. And this was designed by, lawyers and other people who were trying to... and this is too safe. It's not good for kids. It's too safe. The motto of every parent and every teacher should be prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. Now, yes, you can fix major potholes. Thank God we're getting rid of sexual predators who used to roam the streets. So I'm not saying don't fix the road at all, but you've got to prepare kids to go out onto rough roads. In Britain, they understand this. In Britain, they're several years ahead of us. They have the same problems we do, but they are literally putting risk back into their playgrounds. Here, they put out construction materials. Kids love construction materials. And look what this little boy is learning. He has actually reinvented Archimedes and the lever. He's learning physics. And when this goes up in the air, what do we do in America? We have so many lawyers that as soon as someone gets hurt, we ban it. Because if someone gets hurt a second time, the parents might sue. So if someone gets hurt from a super soaker, we're going to ban super soakers for college students. And so we call it safetyism, the worship of safety, the irrational prioritization of safety. But it's not, you have to realize, it's not physical safety only, it's also emotional safety. So here's a really, really terrible way to look at human beings. We are all balloons filled with feelings in a world full of pins. Now that does express, we get it, we understand what that means, and so it's interesting to say that. But do we want to tell students, you are in fact a balloon full of feelings, and the world is so full of pins, don't take any chances, man. That would be the worst thing you could tell to kids. Taleb really develops the metaphor beautifufully. He points out the metaphor of the idea of anti-fragility. He uses fire as an example. A candle flame is fragile. It will, if you blow on it, it will go out. So you have to protect it. You have to put a glass cylinder around it. A candle flame is fragile. But, and he actually, I don't know if he gets this from Marcus Aurelius, but Marcus Aurelius uses the exact same metaphor multiple times. A fire is such that the more you blow on it, the stronger it gets. And so Taleb says, you want to be the fire and wish for the wind. This is a much better way to tell kids to look at themselves rather than balloons full of feelings. So I'm just going to now focus a little time out from our three untruths. I think the effect of the overprotection is in part this. And so I want to show you this. This is just stunning what has happened in the last 5 or 6 years. And it's really the story of Gen Z. So Gen Z, born 1996 and later, as I said, they're not the millennial generation. That's a very different generation. So data on life experiences shows this. The percentage of 12th graders who have a driver's license. Now, when I graduated from high school, when I got my license in 1979, you'd get your driver's license the day you turned 16. You were looking forward to it, it was exciting. You took your parents' car out a few months before without them knowing. You were so excited to do this. And if your birthday was on a Sunday, you'd have to wait till Monday, but otherwise you get your license on your birthday. But over time, millennials and then Gen Z, many never bother to get a driver's license. Now, you might say, well, there's Uber, they don't have to. But driving is fun, but it's also dangerous. But it's not just that they're not getting driver's licenses. Many have never even tried alcohol. Many have never gone out on a date, had any sort of romantic interaction. And many have never even had a job. So we used to think that these were basic things we expected that students did before they showed up at college. And now increasingly, many students are coming in having never had a job, a driver's license, a date, or a drink. They have not had the life experiences of previous generations. They're not as ready for independent living. Now you might say, what are they doing? Well, what are they doing with all their time? Phones, that's right. So we'll come back to that. So it would be one thing if it's just like, oh, they're really safe, they're not doing dangerous stuff, isn't that great? But that's not what it is. So this is nationally representative data on all college students. In 2010, 2012, all undergrads were millennials. And these were the rates, about 2 to 5% of these various things. As the millennials are replaced, so by 2014, 2016, in 2016, they're pretty much all Gen Z. As they're replaced, these things don't go up much, but psychological disorders skyrockets. It triples. So the rate of psychological disorders on campus has tripled in just a few years. But it's not all psychological disorders. It's only 2, depression and anxiety. That's it. Depression and anxiety. So this is now nationally representative data from all teenagers. When the millennials were the teenagers, those were the rates, but when Gen Z comes into the data set, and now they're the teenagers, the rates for boys go up, but the rates for girls go way up. And this is the pattern that you'll see over and over again in the data and in other data that I have online. So now back to college students, rates of severe depression, once again, millennials' rates were stable. As soon as Gen Z comes in, the males go up, the females go way up. So we've been talking about this for a few years. It began around 2012 to 2014 is when all the lines start going up. By 2016, 2017, we're talking about it. And there's an interesting counter-argument that, well, maybe it's not real. Maybe it's just that Gen Z is so comfortable talking about mental illness, so they all say they're depressed, but it's not that they're more depressed. It's a good thing that they're honest. Well, in theory, that could be, but I believe this is wrong, and I can show you the evidence that it's wrong, because it shows up in behavior. It's not just self-report. So this is hospital admission data. This is the number out of 100,000 in the population of teenage girls who are admitted to hospitals each year because they harmed themselves so severely that they required hospitalization. And it was judged to be non-suicidal self-harm, so it's usually cutting themselves. The data for boys is just flat lines that are down here. They're lower. But as you see, there's no real trend from 2001 to 2009. And those are millennials. What happens in the years after that? The rate for the older teen girls goes up 62%. This is a gigantic increase, but it's nothing compared to the preteen girls. Preteen girls did not used to cut themselves, but after 2009, 2010, when it becomes Gen Z, what happens? Their rate nearly triples. They now cut themselves as much as 20-year-old young women do. It's important to note, this line here is barely up. There's no elbow. This is millennials. They didn't get social media until they were in college. Gen Z is defined by the fact that they got social media in middle school. And that, I think, plus the overprotection in the 90s, those 2 things, I believe, are the major causes of this gigantic spike in anxiety and depression. Nothing else, just anxiety and depression. We also see it in suicide. It's not just self-harm, it's actual completed suicides. So girls make more attempts, boys have more completed suicides because they use irreversible means. But we see here for preteens is that the rate for boys, so when it was millennials here, it was these numbers here, but as Gen Z comes in, this is 2012, and 2013, 14, 15, 16, the rate shoots up and stays up. It's up 150%. Now the rate's up for boys too, but as a percentage, it's up even more for girls. So of course, boys' higher suicide rates is a major cause for concern, but that's been constant throughout history. The mystery for me, the mystery I think we have to face is what is happening to girls since 2012 or so? Why is their life changing so much? It's showing up all over the country. This is the #1 concern for college presidents is mental health, surveys show. And again, if you look at survey data from college mental health centers, what's happening? Depression and anxiety up, nothing else. Look, even stress. Gen Z is not more stressed than previous generations. We just never taught them or let them learn how to deal with ordinary daily stress. So they're not coming and saying, I'm stressed. They're coming in for anxiety and depression only. So I have a lot more on this at thecoddling.com, the website for the book. There's a page on international coddling, because it turns out, we thought originally it was just America that was messing up its kids. No, it turns out it's in all the English-speaking countries, and I was just in Spain, it appears to be happening there too. So very briefly, self-harm in Britain, same thing. Boys up slightly, girls way up beginning around 2012, 2013. Canada, boys are down there, up slightly, girls are up a lot more. This is also self-harm. This is depression or major mental illness in Australia, not as sharp an increase, but again, boys are up, girls are up more. And in New Zealand, now New Zealand, there's nothing happening till the last couple of years. Now they don't overprotect their kids as much, and they didn't get social media as quickly as we did. So they're a couple of years behind us, I think, on that. So why? Why is this happening? Why is it happening at the same time in multiple countries with a bigger impact on girls and the biggest impact on preteen girls? Why? Well, I think there's only one explanation. There's only one factor that can explain this fact pattern. I've said that the overprotection is a big part of it. I think it is. But the gender difference especially points us to social media. So I have an article coming out in The Atlantic in a month on how social media has changed and what it's doing to democracy. And I've learned a lot about it that I didn't know until last month. Social media was originally a pretty nice place. So in 2002 was the first one, Friendster. And then comes MySpace. And then comes the Facebook, as it was called originally, the Facebook. And these were basically places that you just helped you connect with your friends, and you put some stuff about yourself up there. So there's display, but there's no way to do the rating and ranking and the outrage and the shaming. It was a pretty nice place. And then everything changes between 2009 and 2012. So in 2006, Facebook opens to the world. Before then, you had to be a college student. In 2007, the iPhone comes out. And up to this point, very few 12 and 13-year-olds have an iPhone or a Facebook account. I mean, you could always lie and just say that you're whatever age, but it wasn't a thing for middle school kids in 2006, 2007. In 2009, now more kids own an iPhone or a smartphone, and Facebook adds the like button, which is transformative, because now every kid is training every other kid with tiny little reinforcement buttons. A whole generation is hooked up like Skinnerian pigeons in Skinner boxes, all training each other to do whatever it is that is rewarded. And this is a major change in human development. Instead of adults teaching kids, instead of kids working things out in small groups, now it's all public performance in large anonymous or sometimes anonymous groups. Furthermore, Twitter adds the retweet button, so now outrage can spread much more quickly. There's a whole set of changes that happened between 2009 and 2012. Most importantly for our story, in 2008, 2009, most kids were not on social media every day. It was around 50% or less. It wasn't the thing that everyone had to do. But as you see, the slope is really steep. These are the 2 years, the principal years, when teen social life just moves en masse into social media. And what happens? These are the 2 years, and that's where the increase starts. So the timing is perfectly explained, and the sex difference is perfectly explained because of this. All kids are addicted to devices, but the boys are mostly playing video games, and video games are not actually as bad as many people think. My son plays various video games where he and his friends team up to kill other groups of boys, but it's just practicing basic cooperation skills, planning, strategy. And when the game is over, they're not kicking themselves. They're not shamed. They're not thinking about it. The game's over. It's fun. Now we do something else. Social media is very, very different. Girls are much more affected by social comparison, especially about body image, thinness, beauty. My niece showed me how on Snapchat, she took a photo of herself, pressed a button, her face got narrower, her eyes got bigger, and her skin got perfectly smooth. She was much more beautiful on Snapchat than she was in real life. Or maybe it was Instagram, whichever one it was. So girls are always more vulnerable to social comparison than boys, and social media just ramps that up and makes it much harder to be a teenage girl than it was 10 years ago. Girls are more affected by who's in, who's out, fear of missing out, seeing all those amazing photos of all your beautiful friends having an amazing time without you. And finally, girls and boys are equally aggressive, but boys' aggression is traditionally physical, and so when they go to video games, they don't punch each other anymore. So I don't know that boys' aggression is down, but I suspect it probably is. But girls' aggression has always been relational. They don't punch each other. They damage other girls' relationships or reputation. And ideally, anonymously. If you can do it and get away with it, that's great. Well, social media, you can create anonymous accounts. You can do anything to anyone at any time. So you're never safe. As a girl, you're not even safe on the weekends. You can be bullied all weekend long, even though school's not in session. So for all these reasons, I believe, social media has had a devastating impact on teen girls, and it has only had a small impact on teen boys. I have a lot more, again, at thecoddling.com under the Solutions tab, and then Better Mental Health. All right, so that's the main idea I wanted to talk to you about. The others will go more quickly. In fact, that idea number 2, I'll have to abbreviate in the interest of time. Always trust your feelings. So chapter 2 of the happiness hypothesis was basically about Buddhism and Stoicism. And so the Buddhists and the Stoics gave us these wonderful insights. It's not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. This is the most widespread piece of wisdom around the world, that we don't experience the world as it is, we experience the world through the filters and distortions, cognitive distortions that we impose on it. Buddha said something similar: your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, once you learn to control your thoughts, as Greg did when he learned CBT, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother. Aaron Beck, one of the founders of CBT, basically took these insights and taught people Stoic and Buddhist practices to free themselves from distortions, and the results are miraculous. We have a list of common distortions in our Atlantic article: catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, emotional reasoning, letting your feelings guide your interpretation of reality. Many of the new practices on college campuses are based on violations of the ancient truth. They are based on the idea that if you feel it, it is real, it is true, and you should respond as if it is true. So we teach students very specific cognitive distortions. We teach them magnification. We teach students to be experts at finding microaggressions in what were previously just normal conversation. We teach students emotional reasoning, that if they feel offended, the other person should be punished, and we give them phone numbers and websites to report people. At NYU, there's a sign in every bathroom telling students how to report me if I've said anything that offends them. They can do it anonymously. And fortune telling. We just guess at how people are going to respond, and we say, because it's not usually that I need a trigger warning. You should provide a trigger warning for them, not for me, but for them. So it's the CBT distortion of fortune telling. So I have to compress that one in the interest of time. That idea number 3. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. And this is straight out of chapter 4. So it's as though somebody on college campuses read the happiness hypothesis and then just decided, let's just do the opposite. Let's just do the opposite of everything the ancients ever told us to do. Let's just reject it. And so this one is that we are, in fact, all prone to dichotomous thinking and tribalism. This is human nature. It doesn't mean we have to live that way, but that's our default. And we should be trying to reduce it, not ramp it up. And so Alexander Solzhenitsyn said it so beautifully. When he's describing his time in the prison camps, in the gulags in the Soviet Union, and he talks about how he could just as easily have been a guard as he is a prisoner being marched to his probable death. And he says, but the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And we all know that this is true. Upon reflection, we all know that this is true. And there's wisdom in every religious tradition talking about why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but you do not see the plank in your? We're hypocrites. And then you combine this with tribalism, the Bedouins saying, I against my brothers, I and my brothers against my cousins, I and my brothers and cousins against the world. We're tribal, but the tribalism is at whatever level is the zone of conflict. And we can tone it down, but it's hard. It's very easy to ramp that up and get people to think us versus them, we're good, they're bad. That's easy. Now, when you put this together, you get one of the main ingredients of call-out culture. So this is a description of call-out culture I want to read to you from a student at Smith College, written in 2016. She says, during my first days at Smith, I witnessed countless conversations that consisted of one person telling the other that their opinion was wrong. The word offensive was almost always included. Members of my freshman class quickly assimilated to this new way of non-thinking. They could soon detect a politically incorrect view and call the person out on their mistake. And I want especially the undergrads here to think whether you've seen this at Colorado, whether you've seen this in your classes or in any part of the culture here. She says, I began to voice my opinion less often to avoid being berated and judged by a community that claims to represent the free expression of ideas. I learned, along with every other student, to walk on eggshells for fear that I may say something offensive. That is the social norm here. Now, I've spoken at schools. I always ask students, do you see this here? And at some schools, all hands go up. At other schools, the hands don't go up, but they say, well, it's not overall, but it's in certain departments or certain areas. And I'm going to guess it's like that here. I'm going to guess that you're not in the Northeast. There are a lot of things about Colorado that are going to make for a less politicized environment. So I'm going to guess that this does not characterize the overall culture, but that some of you have seen it in some parts of the culture. So let's find out. First, just students, only current students. Does this generally characterize the speech climate, the culture here at Colorado? Raise your hand if you say yes. Okay, so some, oh, okay. And current students, raise your hand if you say no. Oh, okay, I'm sorry to see that. It's about maybe, it was a majority said yes. A healthy number said no, but it's maybe 60-40. Of those who raised their hands, 60% said yes, it is here. Which again, I'm surprised by, but actually things are moving so fast that my perceptions from a year or two ago might even be different at those other schools. So it is moving fast. Secondly, even those who don't think it's characteristic, are there certain departments or subgroups here in which this really does characterize it? Raise your hand, students, if yes. And raise your hand if no, you've just never seen this at Colorado. Okay, so this school is not as far gone as many schools that I've been at, many schools in the Northeast, because look, let's face it, this is a terrible way to live. It's terrible to have to fear that everything you say, again, the phrase is walking on eggshells. In college, you want to be able to take risks, explore ideas, and if you always feel afraid that you're going to be called out or reported, it's just no fun. Okay, it's not just the students, it's the faculty too. As I said, I censor myself very heavily. I don't have to worry here because there's nothing you can do to me, but back at NYU, I actually have to be very careful what I say. Oh shoot, this is being filmed. And that's gonna, okay, I'll see if I can edit that out. It's not, let me be clear, NYU is no worse than any place else. It's not anything special about NYU. It's the fact that I work there means that there are restrictions on me, just as would be true at every other school, and is much worse at the Ivies in New England. Okay. Okay. Now, a core idea, I mean, this is a very intellectually rich topic. This is really about a lot of this about new ideas. And so a key idea here that we have to talk about is called intersectionality. And I want to be very clear up front, this is a very good idea. The core idea of it is that identities intersect. If you're a social scientist, you know there are main effects and interaction effects. And so to be a black woman in America is not just the sum of being a black person and being a female. There are interactions that are unique obstacles or indignities that black women experience, and if you don't recognize it, you won't notice it. You won't be aware of it. And so Kimberly Crenshaw has a really good TED Talk. I think the TED Talk is great. I don't disagree with anything she says in the TED Talk. It's very helpful to think this way, to know about this. Okay, but how this is taught on campus ends up greatly amplifying the tribalism and the us versus them, because it's often taught in this way. And I've seen a variety of diagrams, variations on this. So let's take 18-year-olds who come into a college environment, and let's teach them, rather than looking out and seeing all the different people, teach them to see binary dimensions. Some people are white, some people are non-white. Some people are cisgender, some people are transgender. So in this way, you emphasize all these different binary dimensions, and people's level of privilege is based on where they are. So if you're at the intersection of a bunch of, if you're these things, you're privileged. And so the point is, this is not just a way to look at different dimensions of identity. It is a moral framework, because the people above the line are bad. They are privileged, which means they are oppressors. They oppress the good people, who are the people down here. So if you take 18-year-olds who evolved for tribalism, we all evolved for tribalism, we love doing us versus them, and you tell them, look out at all the people and see good and bad people, see good and bad groups, see constant conflict. Life is a zero-sum competition. And the bad people have taken most of the stuff. And so your job is to fight in this zero-sum competition to get more of this stuff. Now, a free society is not a zero-sum game. Abundance, opportunity, possibility keep growing. At least that's the tradition of a liberal society. So the locus of evil, the worst people in the world, are the heterosexual white males. Now, I'm not denying that there are inequalities and structural obstacles, but I think the last thing we want to do is teach people to judge others based on groups. I mean, I'm a product of the 20th century. This is what we did in the 20th century, is we stopped doing that, and now it's back. Judge people based on their group, not as individuals. And so we get things like this essay from a student at Texas State, your DNA is an abomination, and arguing that white death would be the best thing that could happen. Now, he didn't literally mean biological death, he meant cultural death, so that's at least a little better. But the idea of genocide, cultural genocide, like, this is not a way to create a welcoming and inclusive campus. At the New School, a few blocks north of me, in New York City, students created a space only for everybody other than straight white people. So it's only for everybody other than straight white people. And this is, again, this happens at the most progressive anti-racist schools. So it's not likely that these are the most racist places. They're the most anti-racist places is where you get this. And it's not just at schools. This way of thinking is bleeding out into the intellectual climate of adults. So Harvey Weinstein is a monster, and so a gender studies professor writes an essay, "Why can't we hate men? We collectively have every right to hate you collectively. You collectively have done us collectively wrong. Us versus them, good versus evil. You're a man, you're bad." The New York Times hired Sarah Jeong, who had all these tweets about how much she hates white people. Dumbass fucking white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants. The New York Times hires her, and then there's a controversy. And while I'm glad they didn't fire her, because I think nobody should be fired for what they tweeted, I think we need to just stop firing people for things. We need to have other ways to deal with it. But in the controversy, Jessica Valenti writes, "Sarah Jeong is good, her haters are bad. It's not difficult." Now this is the most perfect statement of Great Untruth number 3. This is exactly the last third of the book. And incidentally, she is the feminist at Brown who was arguing that America is a rape culture. So again, it's this binary, good, evil, us, them way of thinking. Now, fortunately, here's one of the most hopeful signs I can give you. There is a counter-reaction, and a lot of it is coming from non-whites, from non-white scholars and activists. So this was just in the New York Times recently. I'm a black feminist. I think call-out culture is toxic. There are a lot of books recently on how identity politics, as we've been doing it, is getting really toxic. And so, and in Britain, there's a whole bunch of writers in America and Britain. So this is actually very encouraging, because not all black people are the same, or white people are the same, or there's a lot of variety within every group, and people have their own opinions. And a lot of people in every group reject this kind of common enemy identity politics. And they generally embrace, as I do, common humanity identity politics. You have to have identity politics. If the corn growers can have a lobby, and if the wine enthusiasts can have a lobby, why can't LGBT people or African? Why can't every group should be able to talk about its interests or so I'm not against identity politics, but it's when it's done in this way, and I mostly see it in religious context. I've got to say, when identity politics is done in a secular context, these days it tends to be pretty ugly and hateful, frankly. But whenever it comes in a religious context, it tends to be much more loving. And so it's not a coincidence that Pauli Murray, who was she was ordained as an Episcopal priest, she got a degree at Yale Law School. She was even this is before Martin Luther King. She was writing like this: "I intend to destroy segregation by positive and embracing methods. When my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them." So this is the kind of identity politics that works. It's loving, it's humanizing, you downplay the tribal divisions, you relentlessly say we're all in this together, we're all one, we're all humans, we're all Americans, whatever it is, you say something to emphasize common humanity, and then it softens people's hearts. Now, it's not enough. Obviously, political pressure was needed too in the civil rights movement, but with this ideology, it worked. The Dalai Lama says the same thing. I'm Tibetan, I'm Buddhist, I'm the Dalai Lama, but if I emphasize these differences, it sets me apart. What we need to do is pay more attention to the ways in which we are the same as other people. And this was Martin Luther King's approach too. Reducing moralism actually produces more effective and humane activism, frankly. So, to conclude, I'm going to have a little bit more to go, but I want to wrap up the main part of the talk here by saying, imagine a university that was built on these 3 untruths. Imagine a university where students come in, and they're told, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, so we will protect you. If anything goes wrong, you tell us, we'll fix it, we'll protect you. We don't want anything to frighten you, we don't want anything to upset you, we'll take care of you. Always trust your feelings. If you feel that somebody says something offensive, we will punish them. And life is a battle between good people and evil people. We'll teach you how to see society as a zero-sum struggle between the good people and the bad. Imagine what it would be like to attend such a school. It would be no fun. It would be constant fighting and hatred. This is no way to create diversity and inclusion. This is a recipe for unending conflict. Conversely, imagine instead that you attended a university built on the opposite of these, where there's the idea that students are anti-fragile and we're going to help you become stronger. We're not going to just tell you to go with your feelings. We're going to actually teach you to question your assumptions. And we're going to teach you that life is morally complicated, not simple. Which one would you rather go to? Which one would you rather send your kids to? So, what can we do now? So if you're with me that there is a problem, if you're with me that there are some bad ideas that we've been teaching, often with good intent, what do we do? So I'll direct comments to 3 different constituencies here, and then we'll have time for questions. So first, raise your hand if you are a parent of kids younger than 23. Raise your hand. Okay, so you all have kids who are Gen Z or whatever is going to come after Gen Z, we don't know. So I urge you, especially if your kids are under 16, please visit letgrow.org. It's a wonderful organization. It's founded by Lenore Skenazy, who wrote the book Free Range Kids. I'm on the board of it. And it works to push back against laws that are making us overprotect our kids. It works to help you give your kids more freedom in the schools too. Parents, you're all wrestling, I assume, if your kids are over 2, you're wrestling with what to do about devices. Here are 3 simple rules that will solve most of the problem for you. Just keep all screens, there's a fixed time, 9 o'clock, whatever it is. Sometime at night, all screens come out of the bedroom. You can keep an Amazon Echo or whatever it is because they can read stories, that's okay. But a screen where you'll be checking, get it out of the bedroom by a certain time. No social media until high school. I know this is hard to do as an individual, but if we all work on changing the norms, we can at least get it out of middle school. It should not be in middle school. Don't let your kids just lie about their age. Really try to stand firm at least on waiting until 13, but ideally not till high school. And finally, agree on a time budget. I'm not going to say, in my family, my son gets 2 hours on his phone. He uses it, he goes around New York City by himself. He uses it for that and other things. So he has 2 hours a day and 2 hours a day on his computer. And an amazing thing happens. He actually chooses carefully what he does. He doesn't just mindlessly sit there for 6 hours. He has to choose carefully, and then he does other things as well. So 3 simple rules will solve most of the problems for you, I think. And third, if you're a resident of Colorado, as almost all of you are, there's some movement in your state legislature. I don't know, I can't say who, but there is, Utah passed a free-range parenting law, which says, because all over the country, if your kids are caught playing in a park, you can be arrested. Your kids can be taken away from you because it'll be referred, some neighbor will call the police, because nobody has seen a child outside in a park since the 1990s. And so people will freak out, they'll call the police will call Child Protective Services, they'll come, they'll question you, and they literally, sometimes they will strip search the kids, literally strip search the kids to check for bruises if you let your kids go to the park because you're a negligent parent. This is insanity. This is what bureaucracies do. So stop it. And the only way to stop it is by passing a law, as Utah did, saying letting your kids be independent is not evidence of neglect. It's that simple. So I hope you're competitive with Utah and you won't let them put you to shame. You can do it here in Colorado. You've got that outdoorsy sort of feel to your culture. So contact your state legislator and say, please, we need a free-range kids bill. Okay, and I want to point out, the current practices are hardest on single mothers because a single mother has to work. And a single mother who works can't be on her kids all the time. And when her kids are 8, she would like them to be able to walk home from the bus stop without her being arrested. So this is a justice issue. This is something that especially affects poor and working women. Second constituency here. Raise your hand if you are a professor at any school or an administrator at any school. Raise your hand at university level. Okay. So for all of you, it's very hard. We're just having a conversation with the psych faculty. It's because we have to give accommodations, and there are moral reasons for doing that, and there are legal reasons we have to accommodate when students have psychological needs. But if you talk about anti-fragility, you can at least make the argument that, like, okay, you're anxious about giving a talk in class. Okay, legally I have to accommodate you, but I'd like you to consider whether you should try it anyway. Now, right now, I would never dare say that to a student because I would be reported so fast. But if the leadership said it from the start, you're anti-fragile, you need to challenge yourself. If you're anxious, work through it. We're here for you if it backfires, but you got to work through things. So if leadership is clear on anti-fragility, then faculty can take chances and sometimes, help students or encourage them to push themselves. Secondly, for university audiences, teaching CBT is one of the most cost-effective things you can do. All schools are having trouble hiring enough counselors to meet the need, but for $10 you can buy a book and give it out to all freshmen, incoming freshmen, and it should help. It should lower the mental health problems on campus. Third, a program that I and my colleagues developed called Open Mind is designed to help students learn from diversity, help them actually talk to people who have different values than they have. It walks them through why is it good for you to talk to people of different views than you do. Why maybe be a little, it's difficult to know the truth, be a little intellectually humble. Here's how psychology messes us up. Here's how you can escape from your moral matrix and actually learn about other moralities. So we teach all this. We teach skills for conversation. How do you start a conversation? We have evidence that improves all the good stuff like like growth mindset, intellectual humility. The bad stuff goes down, like social distance and effective polarization. So if you go to openmindplatform.org, it's free. Any teacher can use it. In religious congregations, Jews are divided over Israel. Unitarians are now divided over some issue. A lot of religious congregations are coming apart. It's very useful in businesses. It's useful in all kinds of organizations. And fourth, for faculty and administrators, I invite you all to join Heterodox Academy. It's an organization of now 3,000 professors and administrators who think that we actually need to expose students to viewpoint diversity. So I urge you to just go to heterodoxacademy.org, and I think it's the About Us tab. You can join. It's free, and it just means that you support viewpoint diversity. And finally, for those of you who are Gen Z students, the most important piece of advice I can give you is tell adults to back off. One thing I've learned, I'll check it with you. I'll check it right now. So Gen Z students, as far as I can tell, are not at all in denial. They are not at all defensive. They see pretty clearly what's happening. And so when I've given talks before, I always ask the students at the end, do you think this is largely a correct diagnosis of what's happening, or do you think I've misunderstood your generation? So let's just try that now. So if you're Gen Z, any Gen Z up to 22, 23 years old, raise your hand now. Raise your hand high. Okay, so just you. Do you think that I largely got this right or wrong? Raise your hand if you think I got it right. Raise your hand. Okay, that's most of you. And raise your hand if you think I largely got it wrong. Okay, 0, and that is usually what I find. So, so here's my point. Especially professors and administrators, you're making assumptions about the students. You're making assumptions that they're fragile. And while some of them are, most of them are not. And even those who are fragile, who are anxious, who are easily discouraged, even they will respond really well if you give them a chance and if you ask them. We put on all these protections without asking the students. So students, make yourselves known. Especially if you're a student who gets accommodations. I'm not saying don't take them, but consider talking to professors about how they can best help you. And it's not always to give you the accommodation, often it's to help you overcome it. I don't know what, but my point is that if the Gen Z students begin speaking up, the adults who are making assumptions will have at least permission to stop making those assumptions. And that would be very, very powerful. One cause that you can really advocate for is to give more freedom to the next generation so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, the same overprotection. Advocate for a free-range kids law, for example, in Colorado, or for better policies at elementary schools and middle schools. And finally, I'll end with this wonderful, wonderful quote from Van Jones. In fact, we have just a couple more minutes, so I will just play you the 3-minute clip. So Van Jones, Democratic activist, he was in the Obama administration, really brilliant, speaking about polarization. He's a left-wing activist, but who really engages with conservatives in productive ways. He's wonderful. So he was interviewed at the University of Chicago. Okay, so he's interviewed by David Axelrod, who ran Obama's campaign originally. And there'd just been an event at the University of Chicago where Corey Lewandowski, who was in the Trump administration, was going to speak, and there were protests. And so Axelrod asked Jones what he thinks of this. So here it is. It's the best statement of anti-fragility I've ever seen.
But I'm interested in yours.
Look, I don't like bigots and bullies. I just want to point that out. I'm against bigots and against bullies, so just leave that as it is.
Those who like bigots and bullies, raise your hand.
Exactly. But I'm gonna say I got tough talk for my liberal colleagues on these campuses, and they don't tend to like it, but they tend to like me, so I get away with it. So I'm gonna keep trying to.
Let's test the proposition.
Exactly. I want to push this. There are two ideas about safe spaces. One is a very good idea, and one is a terrible idea. The idea of being physically safe on a campus, not being subjected to sexual harassment and physical abuse or something like that, or being targeted specifically personally for some kind of hate speech, you are an N-word, whatever. That perfectly fine with that. Perfectly fine with that. But there's another view that is now, I think, ascendant, which I think is just a horrible view, which is that I need to be safe ideologically. I need to be safe emotionally. I just need to feel good all the time And if someone says something that I don't like, that's a problem for everybody else, including the administration. And I think that is a terrible idea for the following reason. I don't want you to be safe, ideologically. I don't want you to be safe, emotionally. I want you to be strong. That's different. I'm not going to pave the jungle for you. Put on some boots and learn how to deal with adversity. I'm not going to take all the weights out of the gym. That's the whole point of the gym. This is the gym. You can't live on a campus where people say stuff you don't like, and these people can't fire you. They can't arrest you. They can't beat you up. They can just say stuff you don't like, and you get to say stuff back. And this you cannot bear.
Okay, so, so in closing, I'll just leave you with this piece of advice, which I think follows from everything that came before. So speaking especially to the Gen Z students here, you are the fire, so go find some wind. Thank you. Okay, so now we have some time for questions.